So the first stage of Freytag's pyramid of dramatic structure is what we call exposition. And the word exposition comes from the verb expose, which means to reveal. So according to Freytag, every play needs to accomplish a certain level of exposition about characters and settings and the situation. In other words, we can't have the play Macbeth if we don't know a little bit about who Macbeth is and what world Macbeth lives in. So in the first act, it's important for you to make sure you understand the definition of exposition as well as the way it operates in Shakespeare's Macbeth. So exposition gives key details. Ordinarily, these key details are about characters, setting, and context, right? We can't begin to understand Shakespeare's Macbeth if we don't know a little bit about who Macbeth is, what the situation in Scotland is, and what some of the other context of the play is. The audience, or in our case, the reader, needs this information to understand the events that happen. Okay, so exposition is always one of the first things that happens in drama. So we see some really important exposition happening in Act 1. And in my opinion, one of the most important moments of exposition occurs when King Duncan learns in Act 1, Scene 2, about Macbeth's success in the battle. So let's make sure we understand this moment in the play. We kind of have King Duncan and King Duncan is not in the battle. He is somewhere else. And there has been a battle that's taken place where Macbeth has led an army to kill a traitor and to eliminate a threat to King Duncan's authority. And we learn about this battle from the words of a captain. A captain comes to King Duncan and tells King Duncan all about the battle and Macbeth's bravery. And one of the most important things for us to realize is that this speech occurs before Macbeth comes on stage. And this speech counts as important character exposition because it tells us a lot about Macbeth, even as it tells Duncan about recent events. Let's take a look. The captain says, "For brave Macbeth, well he deserves that name, disdaining fortune, with his brandished steel, which smoked with bloody execution, like valor's minion carved out his passage till he faced the slave." Let's unpack this language, as indeed it's a little bit difficult. What are some of the words that are used to describe Macbeth? Well, the first adjective we see is brave. So we learn that Macbeth is courageous. The captain in the army thinks that he is full of courage and he is a brave warrior. And he even emphasizes this with a parenthesis where he says, well, he deserves that name. So he calls him brave and then he says he deserves to be called brave. What did Macbeth do? Well, he disdained fortune. Fortune here means fate. This is ironic, by the way. For Macbeth to disdain fortune means that he rejected fate. What does that mean? Well, normally, if you were going to enter a battle, you would probably be afraid of dying. And a soldier is courageous when he or she gives up fear of dying and enters battle to accomplish a purpose. So when the captain says that Macbeth disdained fortune, he means that Macbeth didn't care about his fate in the battle. He didn't care whether he was going to die or not. Instead, he focused on succeeding in the battle, and this is what makes him brave. Okay, so this is important character exposition. But when we look at it from the point of view of the whole play, we're actually getting a little bit of irony here, right? And the irony is the fact that one of the biggest themes of Macbeth is fate, right? The belief that there's a destiny for a human being, that perhaps he or she can have access to. And in Macbeth, Macbeth doesn't reject his fate. When the witches tell him, you will be Thane of Cawdor, you will be King of Scotland, he doesn't disdain fortune. He doesn't reject fate. Rather, he embraces their prophecy of his fate, and he tries to turn it into reality. Okay? When we move on, the captain describes Macbeth as having brandished steel. Steel here is referring to Macbeth's sword, right? The weapon that he uses in battle. Brandished is a word that means displayed, especially a weapon. So if a sword is brandished, it means it's held up in a threatening way. And his sword smoked with bloody execution. Okay, so we have this image here of like a sword, right? If this is the sword. And the sword is smoking, right? It's almost like the sword is on fire. And why is it on fire? Well, it's on fire with all this bloody execution, according to the captain. So there's kind of this image in this speech of Macbeth as such a brave and such a violent warrior that his sword is on fire as he executes his enemies. Okay, so I want to pause here. We could spend a lot more time analyzing this speech, as we could virtually any speech in Macbeth. But I think we get the sense now that this speech by the captain to Duncan, before we even meet Macbeth in the play, really performs an important role of character exposition in telling the audience who Macbeth is and creating an impression of Macbeth that he is brave and that he is loyal to the king. Let's write that down. Brave and loyal. Now, of course, again, another element of irony here is that later on in the play, Macbeth is going to be very frightened, which is the opposite of brave, and he's going to kill the king, which is the opposite of loyal. Okay, so as you're reading Act 1 of Macbeth, I want you to think, what are other moments of character exposition that we have? I'll give you a hint. When Lady Macbeth reads Macbeth's letter, she says that Macbeth is too full of the milk of human kindness. Okay, that happens a little bit later in Act 1. When you're reading that at home, I want you to think, why is this important character exposition about Macbeth, and how does it relate to the rest of the play? Okay, so after we have exposition, according to Freytag, the second stage is what we call rising action. Now remember, in a Shakespearean tragedy, the character kind of starts here and then seems to rise and kind of benefit and gain power and gain success. Then there is a moment at the top before everything falls apart and ends in tragedy, right? So the rising action is the part of the play when Macbeth seems to be improving his fortune. When he becomes king, things seem to be going pretty well. He seems to be accomplishing his plan before everything falls apart, okay? One of the ways that we can think about rising action is like a spring. If you're more comfortable with physics than you are with literature, you could think about rising action as a spring. Let's take a look. So here's a spring, right? Now, if I pull this spring with my hands outward, what's going to happen to the energy of the spring? Well, we're going to have the potential energy increasing, right? The spring is going to have more and more potential to snap back with a lot of force. In a sense, the rising action of a play is like stretching a spring out, right? We see Macbeth going far beyond what he's supposed to be as a nobleman. He kills King Duncan. He becomes king. And the higher he goes, the farther he has to fall in his tragedy. So this process of kind of where the character elevates himself prior to his fall is part of the rising action. And one of the key aspects of rising action is that it results in tension for the audience, right? When we're watching Macbeth and Lady Macbeth plot the murder of King Duncan, all of us are thinking, that's a bad idea, don't do it. Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that, Macbeth? Duncan is a good king. Duncan has given you a promotion to Thane of Cawdor. Your life is pretty good already. You're an important general. You should be happy. Why are you going to kill the king? So as Macbeth and Lady Macbeth plot the murder of the king, we feel more and more nervous for them, right? And this elevated tension in the audience is a key effect of rising action in the dramatic structure of a play. Let's look at an important moment in Macbeth that constitutes rising action. Okay, so we have this scene here. This is Act 1, Scene 7, lines 46 to 51. And one of the things that's really important about rising action in Macbeth is that Lady Macbeth plays an important role in rising action, right? She kind of convinces Macbeth to go ahead with the murder. So in this scene, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth had already talked about the witch's prophecy via Macbeth's letter to her, and Lady Macbeth has already decided that the raven is horse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under her battlements. In other words, she's already decided that Duncan will die and Macbeth will become king. But Macbeth is having second thoughts. In his first soliloquy, he reasons, Duncan is a good king. He's been so clear in his great office. Also, Duncan is a kinsman. In other words, Macbeth and Duncan are related. They're relatives. Another reason is that Duncan is his guest, which means that he should treat him well, not murder him. So Macbeth reasons, you know what? I'm not going to kill Duncan. This is a bad idea. And the audience, for a moment, is kind of like, good. He's not going to kill King Duncan. And Macbeth says, I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none. What he means is Lady Macbeth is challenging Macbeth and saying, aren't you brave? Why won't you kill the king? Why are you afraid to do it? And Macbeth is reasoning quite rationally that I dare or I have the courage to do all that becomes a man. In other words, to do everything that is appropriate for a man. In other words, anything that it is his duty to do, he has the courage to do. But then he says, who dares do more is none. In other words, anyone who goes beyond what is appropriate is not making themselves more of a man or a better man, but actually making themselves less of a man. And we learned in our previous section that the king's power is ordained by God in the eyes of Shakespeare's audience. So by no means is it appropriate for a man to kill the king. So Macbeth is counter-arguing against his wife. But Lady Macbeth replies and says, what beast was it then that made you break this enterprise to me? In other words, what beast, what devil, we can probably gloss this as, made you reveal this plan? To me. When you durst do it, and again, st, right, is a verb ending here. When you dared to do it, then you were a man. And to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man. Okay, so we don't need to unpack all of this now, but what we need to realize is that Macbeth is trying not to have to kill the king. And Lady Macbeth is convincing him by questioning his masculinity. Right? In other words, she is saying, if you don't kill Duncan, then you're not really a man and you're not really brave. And the audience feels this argument and realizes that Macbeth is now likely to kill the king. And so we feel nervous and we feel tense until that tension breaks with the climax of the play. Okay, so we've talked about exposition, which reveals information about characters. We've talked about rise in action. Let's now talk about climax. So climax refers to the turning point of the play. Climax is when the tension that's produced in rising action is at its highest point just before that tension breaks. Okay? And in tragedy, climax is when the final deed that kind of puts the character at their highest point is accomplished right before the downfall begins. Okay? In a Shakespearean tragedy, the climax is the point when the protagonist's life goes from getting better to getting much worse. Okay? So, one thing you can ask yourself is, what is the climax of Macbeth? Could we say that there are more than one climax? What might be some different options for what the climax is? I think it would be reasonable for some students to believe that the murder of Duncan is the climax of the play. Right? This is the act when Macbeth's fate goes from good to bad, maybe, and it's the act that kind of brings about his downfall in a sense. I think that there's a little bit more of a consensus to believe that the climax of Macbeth is actually the murder of Banquo. Because this is the point of the play when really there's no coming back for Macbeth. He's murdered his friend. His good character has been totally overtaken by his ambition. And also, it's not a successful crime. When he kills Duncan, it works. He becomes king. But when he hires the murderers to kill Banquo and Fleance, Fleance escapes, which allows the part of the prophecy that he's most afraid of to come true. Let's take a look at an important moment in the play related to this climax. So, this conversation between the murderer and Macbeth happens in Act 3, Scene 4. And this happens at the banquet. Right? The dinner party that is thrown for Macbeth's coronation. By the way, coronation is a word that means the ceremony where a new king is crowned. Okay, so Macbeth has become the king of Scotland, and they're throwing a banquet to celebrate him becoming king. Now, Macbeth has decided to have Banquo and Fleance, Banquo's son, killed in order to make sure that the second part of the prophecy doesn't come true. He's afraid that Banquo will be father to a line of kings rather than him. So imagine that Macbeth is at the banquet and the murderer comes back in, and Macbeth is waiting for the murderer to tell him what happened. And the murderer tells Macbeth that they were partially successful. They killed Banquo, but they did not kill Fleance, Banquo's son. And as soon as Macbeth learns this, this is where his hallucinations of Banquo begin. This is where the paranoia becomes much more intense. This is where Macbeth becomes less rational and begins doing stupid and evil things like killing Macduff's wife and son. Okay, so the murderer says, "I, my good lord," right? Macbeth asks, "Where's Banquo? What happened to him?" "I, my good lord, safe in a ditch he bides, with 20 trenched gashes on his head." Okay, so 20 gashes. Gashes are like cuts on his head. So if you were struck with a sword 20 times on the head, you would probably die, as Banquo died. And his body is in a ditch, right? Hidden from view. The least a death to nature. Okay, so what he means here is that even the least gash, in other words, the smallest cut, would be a death to nature. But he gave him 20 cuts. So he's saying, Macbeth, don't worry, Banquo is definitely dead, right? And Macbeth says, thanks for that. But in an aside, in other words, in a speech that the audience hears, but that the other characters don't, Macbeth reveals his real worry. He says, "There the grown serpent lies. The worm that's fled hath nature that in time will venom breed." Let's make sure we understand this. So there's kind of an image here. There's a metaphor here where he talks about two serpents. You know, draw a picture here. So we have one serpent is described as grown, right? This is Banquo. The other serpent is described as a worm, right? Because a worm kind of looks like a small snake. So this is Fleance. And he says that there the grown serpent lies. In other words, the big serpent, Banquo, is dead. He's in a ditch with 20 gashes on his head. The worm that's fled is Fleance. He hath nature that in time will venom breed. So what is venom? Venom is a snake's poison. So what Macbeth means is that even though Banquo is dead, Fleance lives. And soon Fleance will produce venom or poison. And this is exactly what Macbeth is afraid of. Okay, so the reason why we interpret this moment as the climax of the play is because Macbeth has failed in his murders and he's beginning to grow more and more afraid, right? Here he's afraid of Fleance growing up, seeking revenge, and ultimately fulfilling the second part of the first prophecy, which is that Banquo's sons, not Macbeth's, will get to form a line of kings. And indeed, James I, who's watching the play, traditionally was understood to be part of that line of kings, a great-great-great-great-great-grandson of Fleance, the worm described here in the metaphor. So, exposition reveals information about characters and setting. Rising action is when the problem gets more complicated as we approach the climax and the audience feels more tension. Climax is the moment when the character's fate turns around. It goes from improving to now the inevitable tragic downfall coming. And falling action is kind of the opposite of rising action. Falling action is when that spring that was stretched out begins collapsing on itself with more and more force. So falling action refers to events that bring about the resolution of the play's action. In other words, we've already stretched the spring out, the problem has already reached its zenith, and now all that's left is for the fate of the protagonist to end in destruction. And all of the events that happen that bring Macbeth to his tragic fate and death are part of the falling action. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at one moment in Shakespeare's Macbeth that counts as an important part of the falling action. Okay, so something we've brought up a couple of times in our course so far is that there's a doubling or a cycling in Shakespeare's Macbeth. In other words, certain characters are almost identical to other characters, but are different in key ways. So the murder of Banquo and then the murder of Lady Macduff and Macduff's son are kind of doubles of one another. So a key part of the climax is the failure to murder Fleance. A key part of the falling action is the murder of Lady Macduff and Macduff's son. Let's take a look. So here we have a scene where the murderer, who Macbeth has hired, arrives at Macduff's house in Fife, right? A city in Scotland where Macduff is Thane. And the murderer says about Macduff, he's a traitor, right? So the murderer says, Macduff, a traitor. Now, in a sense, Macduff is a traitor because who is the king? Macbeth is the king. And who is Macduff loyal to? Macduff is loyal to Malcolm. But we know that Malcolm is the rightful king of Scotland, not Macbeth. And therefore, Macduff is not really a traitor. So, unlike Macbeth, Macduff has a son, and his son is loyal to him. So the son says, thou liest. You're a liar. Thou shag-eared villain. This is just a Shakespearean insult. So what the son of Macduff is basically saying is that my father is not a traitor. And the murderer says, what, you egg? This is another insult. insults in Shakespeare's day were quite different than they are today, right? The murderer stabs him. This is an action. And he says, young fry of treachery. In other words, the son of treachery, the son of betrayal, the son of Macduff. And the son says, he has killed me, mother. Run away, I pray you. Pray you here means ask you. And Macduff's son dies. And Lady Macbeth leaves screaming, murder, murder, murder. Now, why is this a moment of the falling action in Macbeth? Well, it's a moment in the fallen action because this is an important step in Macbeth's downfall. We mentioned earlier that the murder of Macduff's son doesn't make any sense because what does the witch's second prophecy say? It says, beware Macduff. So when Macbeth tries to kill Fleance, even though it's really evil, it kind of makes sense, right? The witches say that Banquo's sons will be king. So Macbeth might be thinking, well, that means that Banquo's sons are going to steal the throne from me. Therefore, I have to kill him. So it's evil, but it kind of makes sense. But the second prophecy of the witches says, beware the Thane of Fife, beware Macduff. So that means that Macduff is Macbeth's enemy. Now, why would you attack the son of your enemy? It's only going to make your enemy more angry. It would maybe make sense if Macbeth tried to murder Macduff himself, but he doesn't. Instead, he terrorizes Macduff, and he just gives him more justification for fighting against Macbeth, right? So we can take a look from a strategic point of view at Macbeth's decision to have Lady Macduff and Macduff's son murdered as a tactical mistake. He's only enraging his enemies. He's only giving them more motivation to fight against him. So when Macduff finally kills Macbeth and cuts off his head in Act 5, in a sense, Macbeth has brought it on himself not only by murdering Duncan, the rightful king of Scotland, but by antagonizing Macduff, right? He's given him motive to kill Macbeth. So this is a key scene in the falling action of the play. Resolution. So, all right, so we're now moving to the final stage of Freytag's pyramid called the resolution. Sometimes this is also called the denouement as well, which is a French word. It basically means the conclusion of the play where everything is resolved, all the problems have worked out to their conclusion. I want to offer an aside here about an important literary theorist and a concept that he introduced that's going to be shed some light on what the resolution is in Shakespearean drama. So, perhaps you've heard of Aristotle. He is a Greek philosopher, political theorist, mathematician. He was really everything. And Aristotle wrote a text called the Poetics, which is really the first foundational Western work of literary theory extant today. And in the Poetics, one thing that Aristotle said was that the purpose of a drama is to make the audience, the purpose of a tragedy, I should say, is to make the audience feel very tense and worried, right? So the audience sees a character like Macbeth, they identify with him, and then as he starts making mistakes, the audience gets more and more nervous. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And you feel all this tension physically in your body. And then when the tragedy happens to the protagonist, even though it's a sad ending, all that tension disappears. It's kind of, you collect all the tension in your body and in your mind, and then when Macbeth finally dies, you go, it's over, right? So Aristotle called this emotion, or this result, catharsis. This is an important word to know, right? So one way that we can recognize what resolution is in Freytag's pyramid is we can think about the Aristotelian definition of tragedy, and we can say that the resolution of all of the play's action in a tragedy is going to result in catharsis for the audience. Even though naturally we kind of root for Macbeth, right? We know he's a bad guy, but naturally we see things from his perspective because he's the protagonist. When he's finally dead and Lady Macbeth is dead and Malcolm is crowned the king and Macduff is made the hero of Scotland. It feels like everything is as it should be. Okay? So let's go ahead and let's take a look at a moment in the resolution of Shakespeare's Macbeth. A moment that shows when all of the events have concluded the play's action and resolved its problem and conflict. Okay? So this is in Act 5, Scene 8, the final scene of the play. And the stage direction says it all. Enter Macduff with Macbeth's head. Right? So we have this kind of image of, I imagine Macbeth as having a beard. And here's Macbeth, right? His crown is, no longer on him. Maybe the crown is on the ground because he's been killed. And Macbeth is dead. He's been killed. And Macduff carries his head to Malcolm to show him, hey, I've killed the traitor. He's gone. Now you can be the rightful king of Scotland. Okay? And Macduff says to Malcolm, hail king. And he's speaking to Malcolm. Hail king, for so thou art. Behold, where stands the usurper's cursed head. So behold means look at. And the usurper, this is a really important word. A usurper is someone who steals the throne. Right? Someone who pretends to be king or violates the line of succession and falsely assumes the role of king. So he's talking, of course, about Macbeth here. So he's saying, look at the usurper's cursed head. The time is free. I see thee compassed with thy kingdom's pearl, that speak my salutation in their minds, whose voices I desire aloud with mine. Hail, King of Scotland. And everyone says, hail, King of Scotland. And they're speaking to Malcolm. So basically, the problem of the play has been resolved. Macbeth. All the actions have reached their logical conclusion in the death of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Things are as they should be. Malcolm is King of Scotland. And all of the noblemen are saying, hail, King of Scotland. They're showing their loyalty. The universe is back the way it should be. And the tragedy is resolved. And the audience, even if they feel sad about Macbeth, the audience has released all that tension and experienced catharsis. So this is the fifth and final stage of dramatic structure according to Freytag's pyramid. So in today's lesson, we focused on dramatic structure. We learned that a Shakespearean drama is divided into 5 acts. Every act is divided into multiple scenes, and every scene is composed of lines, usually of speech. We took a look at the 5 stages of Freytag's pyramid. We saw that there's the exposition, when key information about characters is revealed. We saw there's the rising action, when the plot thickens, the audience feels tension, and action mounts towards the climax. We saw that the climax is the point of highest tension for the audience. It's the point at which the tragic character reaches the point of no return and goes from on the way up to on the way down towards his tragic demise. We saw the falling action is when things start to approach their tragic conclusion for the character. For example, when Macbeth makes the tactical error of killing Macduff's wife and son and motivating Macduff to fulfill the second prophecy. And we saw that the resolution is a moment of catharsis for the audience when the tragic conclusion befalls the protagonist and the universe is set aright and all the problems have been resolved and the tension for the audience has dissipated. So I'm Edward Dunnigan. I'm here as always with the Bund Education, and I look forward to seeing you in the next section when we look more closely at dramatic speech. Thank you.